Welcome to the Mississippi Family Homestead Podcast. We also have a YouTube channel, Mississippi Family Homestead. I'm Scott.
And I'm Tina.
And we're going to do this once a week, and we'd invite you to watch our YouTube channel. We do 3 live streams a week, so where we talk about things like what we're going to talk about tonight, which is being self-sufficient.
And do you really want to be?
Right. Do you want to be 100% self-sufficient? And how self-sufficient can we really be this day and time? So do you think, to start out, do you think you would want to be 100% self-sufficient?
I don't know. I don't think I would want to be 100% self-sufficient. Now, I would strive to be, but I just don't think in this day and age that it's possible if you're living even out in rural, where we live in rural Mississippi, to be self-sufficient all the time. I mean, we strive to be. We want to grow our own food, so at least that part of our life is self-sufficient. But as far as like not going to the store or buying some things, I don't know. I don't think I could.
Right. There was a person that I watch a lot of documentaries, and Dick Proenneke was a very interesting person. If you've never heard of him, look him up on YouTube, and there's some documentaries. But what happened was he lived in California, and in 1968, he had finally had enough. He moved to Alaska, the Twin Lakes area of Alaska, which is a very remote area, and he lived there for the next 30 years, and he lived there by himself. He built his own cabin. He learned to he studied the weather while he was there. He learned to grow food. He learned the animals around him, and he was very interesting, and he was a very self-sufficient person.
And he had those birds that
he had the birds come to his hand. He would hold out his
stuff.
hand, and the birds would come and land on his hand, and I mean the wild birds. And, he would watch the bear out there, and it would, he's a very interesting person.
Yeah.
And he lived on an extreme remote place for, I think, for about 30 years.
Yeah, and he would have his own vegetable garden and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, he grew everything.
Did he have, like, anybody come in at all?
About every 6 weeks, there was a bush pilot that came in and would bring him some supplies, some basic supplies. And he even, he would even get his mail up there, but he only got it every 6 weeks or so. But depending on the weather, whether he got the mail or not also. But what was really interesting, as self-sufficient as he is, he still was not 100% self-sufficient, because he did have that pilot bring in things, with the mail. This was back 1968 and on, so he was able to order things from the Sears catalog. If he needed a new hammer or a new, type of tool, he could order from the Sears catalog, and, they would bring it in.
Yeah.
So they would sugar and flour and stuff. He could still have that brought in. So
he wasn't 100%. Like, I would think that if you're living off the land like that, you make your own sugar substance, like, get honey from the bees or something. You know what I'm saying? You can do that. But I didn't know that about him, that he did actually have the supplies brought in.
Right. He did have some supplies brought in. So, but he was very self-sufficient, but he wasn't at the point he was 100% self-sufficient. So, and one interesting thing, for him to have the money to order things like that, he would actually pan for gold.
Really?
That's what I heard, and he would sell that gold to have money to order stuff from like the Sears catalog.
I don't think we wouldn't have gold. If we wanted to pan for gold, we wouldn't be able to pan for gold.
I don't think we do.
We have some rocks in the creeks and stuff.
I don't know that anybody wants any brown rocks.
I don't either. I don't know what we have in there. Like petrified wood, maybe. I don't know if we could sell that.
We don't. I don't think we do. I wish we had something on this land that would sell, but it's real interesting that he was very self-sufficient. He's known as a extreme self-sufficient person.
Yeah.
But even him did not have, he was not 100% self-sufficient. So, you know, as we look at that stuff, we got to remember, you know, even though, and then like we were talking about the Indians one time, you know, the
Yeah.
American Indians, and, you know, they really weren't self-sufficient when you look at it.
because they had to trade with other tribes and with each other. And when we think about self-sufficient, we think about like a person by themselves, or at least just with your family, and nobody else. You know, nobody to trade with or anything like that. You got to do it all on your own. And they really didn't have that. They traded with the other Indians for, you know, supplies and whatever. I mean, they were, as far as living off the land and doing their food and all that kind of stuff, they kind of were. But they did trade with those other tribes.
Yeah, they
So
did trade.
There was a
so-
dependence there, just like it
Yeah.
is today on, you know, we go to the store. It was kind of the same thing. They wouldn't.
And then once the settlers were here, they, you know, they definitely traded with them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I read even in our area there was a person that he's buried up the road, but he was one of the settlers that were interacting with the Indians, and he would trade with, you know,
Okay,
trade with
yeah.
them. I'm not sure what they traded, but he would trade with them, and you know, so I'm not sure. You know, if you go back far enough, probably a
Caveman
tribe might,
days?
you know, a tribe might have been self-sufficient, but I don't know. You know, it's kind of a debatable topic about like what it really is self-sufficiency.
Right, because I think self-sufficiency is completely either doing by yourself or with just your family, you know, own land, never go into the store, making your own food, your own clothes, you know, living completely alone. And I
So
know,
that would be your family doing that, making your own clothes.
Right. That's what I would think self-sufficiency is. And, you know, in the pioneer days, they did kind of do that. You know, they would go out on these prairies, but even then you would read about, you know, every few months they had to go to the store. You know, they had
Yeah.
to travel like days to get to the store so they could buy the basics like the flour and
Right.
the sugar and that kind of stuff.
And they had to buy coal for their fireplace sometimes.
Well,
you know.
yeah, but when they lived out on the prairie, I guess they had to use their, you know, what they could find out on the prairies.
Right.
So,
And, you know, so I don't, you know, even like they weren't, but like if you go back to the biblical days, you know, they weren't
either.
you
You
know.
know, they were lived in towns and cities, and they traded, and they,
Yeah.
you know, they had money. You know, they traded
Right.
for things. So you'd have to go really far back to try to do
And
that.
I don't even know if you know, could you go back far enough to even do that? To, you know.
I mean, I guess have to be Adam and Eve, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, all right, was Adam and Eve totally self-sufficient?
mean,
I
I
guess
don't
they
know.
were
They
because they
were.
were the only ones here
Yeah,
at
I
the
guess
time.
so. They had to be.
Yeah.
So
You know, they would be probably the only ones self-sufficient. Okay, so this brings up another question. You know, would you want to be totally self-sufficient? Because if you think about it, if you're going to be 100% self-sufficient, and say you're going to live in the woods, 100% self-sufficient, I think, you know, would you give up the modern medicine today?
right, because you know, we were just talking about the pioneer people. They died young because they didn't have that medicine, you know, to take care of them when they were out on those prairies. You know, women died in childbirth, and babies died of diseases and things. And even if there was an injury to someone, you know, a bad injury, they didn't have antibiotics like we do
Right.
now that you could go to the doctor and get, or just basic stuff to buy
Yeah.
off of the counter, you know, that would help you heal or whatever.
I mean, like, you know, I got hurt today.
Yeah.
Which I didn't go to the doctor, but, you know, I put a Band-Aid. Had we not had, you know, the Band-Aid, it wouldn't have been that easy.
Yeah,
but,
it would have been, you know, it gets infected. And, you know, I guess they put rags and stuff on wounds and that kind of stuff. But if you have to think about that, if it was a really bad
Yeah.
wound, you would have to probably see if you could travel somewhere to get a doctor, to help you back then.
But if you were 100% self-sufficient, you're not going to do that.
No,
And there
you don't.
are some people that don't believe in medicine, period.
That's true.
But I don't know that you would. I mean, most people that want to be self-sufficient, I think when we talk about self-sufficiency, we want to be as very low dependent on the system.
Yeah, so like we don't want to have to go buy all of our groceries from the grocery store. I want to be just the basic things like, the flour and the sugar and those kind of things that I can't really grow here. We can grow the vegetables, and we even have fish, in the pond. We could go hunting, and eat deer, which our son does eat a lot of deer meat. That's mostly what they eat. If we wanted to get the fish out of the pond, we could fish in the pond. If we want to do, vegetables, we are growing a garden. So I feel like we'll be able to, put all those vegetables up for the winter time and maybe hopefully last for about a year. So that's less self-sufficient that I have to be at the grocery store.
Right.
Yeah.
But would you want to go without going to the grocery store ever?
I wouldn't. I don't think so. I don't think I would want to go.
And let me ask you this, could you even survive? I know we have some things, on this land. We have about 50 acres of land in Mississippi here, and there are some wildlife that we can, if we needed to survive. But is that enough to keep us alive?
For years, right? Because if you talk about self-sufficiency, all of those things would have to last for years. I mean, you talking about, I don't think I would want to be.
Yeah.
I just don't.
Do you think we could, though? You think it's possible?
I think
if you had good health.
If you had good health, I think it would be probably possible. It is a possibility, but I don't know. You would have to. I mean, eventually, clothes and stuff like that wears out. You would be wearing.
Well, where would you? All right, if they wear out, you could say, well, I can sew, but where would you get the materials to sew?
That's right. You would have to have materials to sew. Your clothes or
even
whatever.
If you grew cotton, you would still have to
have the tools to make it to clothes.
To what are you weaving cotton? Is that what you call it?
You weave the cotton, and they did back in the old days. They did weave the cotton. They had these a loom or whatever to do it with, but I guess we would have to acquire that in order to be self-sufficient in the first place.
Yeah.
For clothes at least. I feel like we could probably grow enough vegetables to last through a winter and then save the seeds, to replant the next year. And, we have the fish in the pond. I feel like we could eat those if we needed to. We could, but I don't think we could do it for years. I mean, not 30 years.
See, I don't know that really anybody in our modern life right now, I don't think many people could do it.
I don't think they could either.
Because we are so spoiled today as a culture. Mm-hmm. We can't even do without our air conditioner.
I know,
here.
right?
If we went totally self-sufficient, it'd have to be, we do want to get an off-grid cabin, but we're not there yet. So
you'd have to do some solar stuff, but even then you have to have batteries.
And you have to replace those batteries.
Yeah, you have to replace them. So you'd have to depend on somebody, to get new batteries.
Unless you just totally didn't live if you lived without electricity and that kind of thing, it is possible. And I think it was more possible back in the 1800s because
I think so too.
Down here in the South, the homes were built more knowing that it was heat. They had higher roofs and all that, so they were built to be, to not be as dependent because there wasn't any electricity. So, I just don't think anybody now would
Yeah.
As romantic as it looks on the internet,
Yeah.
I just don't think people would really want to do it.
So, what do you think some real ways, like if you really wanted to try to be at least partly self-sufficient,
Yeah.
what would you do today? Like, how could we be more self-sufficient? Like, we did really bad last year. Like, we didn't grow a garden.
Right, we didn't have a garden at all this
Yeah,
year.
last year.
We're making up for it this year. Not only do we have these raised bed behind us, but we have a pretty big garden. But one thing I would do is collect rainwater and have our own water source. So right now we're on the county water system, and a lot of people in this country, in America, are. But I would like to, and that's one thing I would like to do is be not as dependent on that.
On the water,
we have
yeah.
spring water here. I would like to get it filtered, and then also, we want to start collecting rainwater.
Yeah.
And if you're going by now, it would be the bucket would be low.
It would, because it's dry right now.
Right.
I mean, you would
it's
have
very
to have
dry.
you'd
in the
have to
area.
get a huge tank,
Yeah.
to depend on rainwater. And there, I see a lot of people that do, in different homesteads, that they have a system and they have big tanks and they let that rainwater collect, I guess, over time. And it does, they are able to build it up, and they use it, for basic needs, like especially your drinking water, and they have a filter on it. So I guess you would have to have some kind of filtration if you were going to drink the water, but we do have a couple of springs.
Right.
On our property.
We do have some springs, so we do have water source. And actually, your family used to have water from that spring.
They did.
Didn't they?
We drank out of that spring when I was young, when I was little, and my grandpa had a pump in it, and we would drink that spring water. It was the best water you ever tasted in your life.
And actually, the pump it doesn't operate now, but the pump is actually still there. So, we've thought about redoing it and, cleaning it out. But it would be great to have some spring water.
I know. It tastes so good.
Yeah. But, another thing with growing these gardens, something else, I don't want this to sound wrong because I know it won't replace medicine, but some certain herbs and things that you plant that you could, use for minor things.
Yeah, I think there's
good.
something called comfrey. I'm not sure what that is, but a lot of people talk about comfrey, and that you can use that elderberry. And it's, garlic, those kind of stuff is good it's good medicine. So, we could look at getting some of those type of things for medical needs, for basic medical needs.
Yeah. And another thing that we could do, I'd like to eventually get completely off the electrical grid.
Yeah.
We're looking at building a cabin out back, out in these woods back here. We've already kind of cleared off the place to build it, but I would like to build it off grid and maybe do some solar, but have it so it's more self-sufficient and less, I believe in the long run, it would be actually cheaper probably if you did it right in the long run. Solar is pretty expensive now, but I'm not at the point where I want to do solar for the whole house because that is expensive, but it would be nice for the electric to be kind of self-sufficient, so you could do that, and not
have
be
a wood
dependent
stove for your heat. They still make wood stoves. That would be nice to have.
All
that.
right, would you want to cook on a wood stove?
I don't know. My grandma says that she used to say she'd never cook on a wood
she
stove.
said
I've
she
never
never wanted
cooked on a wood stove, so I don't know how it works. Now they
She
have
never wanted to go back to one, did she?
Right. And, nowadays they have a more modern, I guess, wood stove than they did back then. So I guess it was kind of more modern. I could, but, I don't know. I don't know if I could. I would have to learn. Your wood has to be a certain temperature or the top of the stove gets too hot.
I think they're a little easier to control. You do have to know what you're doing, but they're easier to control now than they were. But, you still have to know what you're doing.
Yeah, to cook on one. And, I do see, people on the YouTube or whatever cooking on some wood stoves, and they seem to do good,
Yeah.
the wood stoves. And another thing that people used to do, they would actually have a fireplace and they would
Yeah.
cook in the fireplace. You can
Oh,
cook
yeah.
lots of things in just a fireplace if you have the right utensils and tools and pots and pans,
Right.
that could actually go in a fireplace.
I mean,
So,
some of them, I guess, in the colonial days, they may not have had a stove at all. They cooked
right,
on the
they cooked in
fireplace.
the
That was,
fireplace.
because we've been to Natchez where you see these old homes, and some of the kitchen fireplace. You remember the one we went and they found the kitchen
Yes,
fireplace? It was a much wider fireplace than others. And they actually cooked over that instead of a
right.
actual stove.
Yeah. So I guess, if we had a fireplace, you could cook in the fireplace.
Yeah.
So what about you need if you're going to have animals, you got to have animals if you're on a homestead
And
or
we have
self-sufficient.
chickens. We
Yeah,
have
we have
about
chickens.
30 chickens. So,
Yeah.
and by the way, we feature those chickens on YouTube. We have a live stream for our silkies, and we have all kinds of different chickens, don't
Yeah,
we?
we do. We have tons of chickens. We got Easter eggers.
Yeah.
We got silkies. We got Americanas. We got all kinds of stuff. So I have colored eggs and just brown eggs. I have black copper morans, all kinds.
So
But,
we're kind of self-sufficient in that part.
yeah, except I don't want to eat my chickens. I have
Yeah,
a problem.
those are her pet chickens, but that doesn't mean we're not going to get chickens to
harvest
harvest.
eventually.
We're wanting to
Yeah,
raise those specifically for meat birds.
that's right. So I'll have to just not be close to them. We'll just raise them for meat birds.
Yeah, and one thing to be more prepared is, and I think you already do this, you have like first aid stuff for the chickens.
Yeah, I do.
People might be saying, what? But like you actually have had some instances in the past few weeks that the chickens got hurt.
Yeah, I had a chicken get hurt, and also the chicken got sick, like it got like a cold or something. And there's vet RX that you give the chicken and put it in the water to
And it
get
actually
it well.
worked, did it?
Yeah, it did. And so if you're wanting to be self-sufficient, because you obviously can't take a chicken to the vet like you can a cat or a dog. So that's one thing that you have to do for them. And even I don't know a whole lot about if you have cows and goats and those kind of things, but I know you have to have some kind of some aid for them if they get hurt.
Yeah, and that's one thing that scares me about getting cows.
Yeah.
Is there's certain things you've got to know to take care of them medically.
Yeah.
I remember my grandfather, he had cows, and there were certain things he had to do. So that's one thing that has kind of kept me from getting cows.
Mm-hmm. Is because we don't, we're not, I know a lot about chickens, but we don't really know a whole lot about the cows. So
Right.
we're reluctant to get some cows. But, talking about cows, if you could be self-sufficient and have a milk cow,
Yeah.
or even people milk goats,
Right.
for your milk. And with milk, you can make cheese and butter, from that milk. If you're living on a homestead, if you could get a goat or a cow to have a milk goat
And
or
I
cow.
think we would love to do that.
I think we would too. I would love to learn how to do that
Yeah.
part of it. So that would help with that part, because that's one of the things that I like going to the store for is, I have the milk and the butter and the cheese. I love cheese. But if you have an animal you can make lots of things out of milk. So,
And another thing is, which we do normally, is canning our
Yeah.
food. Some people do some fermenting stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
like canning our food, we can and we freeze. And the
Right.
reason we do both is so we'll have that option. Our freezers, obviously, we don't have endless freezers, so
Right.
we do we do can some things, and so we do that already.
Right,
So,
we do.
That's one way that you can really be a little more self-sufficient
Right.
and make a few less trips to the grocery store.
And, if you don't hunt or fish, you can learn to hunt and fish. Ours is real easy. We have a pond right here.
Yeah.
And if you're acquiring a homestead or on a homestead, a thing to think about would be getting a pond, because if you're going to have livestock or even a garden, that pond can supply the water for all needs,
Yeah.
on
And
the,
if
on
you're
the
listening,
homestead.
if you're listening only on the audio podcast, that was we had Pebbles, our cat, just jump across the table.
Yeah.
So, but again, we are recording this podcast outside in our backyard.
Yeah, in front of
tonight,
the raised garden beds.
Yeah, but another thing is, for people to be more self-sufficient is learn to hunt.
Yeah,
And I'm going to go ahead and tell you that is not for everybody, because when you do hunt, you're harvesting an animal, and there are some people, even people that eat meat may not be able to harvest an animal. So,
right. It's
that's
hard if you hadn't never done that. I mean, like, I was just raised that way, and
Yeah.
so were you. But if you're, moving from a big city to start a homestead because, just because you're tired of living in a big city and you want to start this life of a homestead, that's something that bothers some people, that they're not able to do,
Yeah.
to hunt and stuff. And you may not be able to. One thing I even catching a fish and cleaning it
Yeah.
it's work. It's
Yeah.
hard to do.
It is hard to do.
Yeah.
And,
So, it is.
or I say it's hard to do. It's it's a very messy thing.
It is. It's a
you
messy
know,
thing.
But that's part of it. But it is good for you because you learn exactly where your food comes from. You learn.
You're
the
more
process
appreciative.
I think you're very more appreciative. And then also there are some people that actually make their own household products.
Yeah, really. So I think you can make your own soap. They used to in the old days. They made their own soap from like lye.
Yeah.
And they did, and a lot of people still practice that. They'll sell the soap. Like I think the Amish people sell their own soap and stuff. So I think that's interesting if you could learn to make your own soap.
And one of the things my mother used to do when we were growing up, I think baking soda was the answer to everything.
It was, and I still use baking soda. Like
she had
I
baking
use it,
soda in the refrigerator all the time.
Yeah,
It had that little vent on the side.
I use it for cleaning a lot, and vinegar. I use vinegar and baking soda to clean a lot of things. I use baking soda to cook with and to clean with. So it has a lot of purpose to it. You can get a big old thing. I don't know if you know that. You can get a big old thing.
I've seen those things.
Yeah.
But my mother, she believed in that baking soda.
Yeah.
It was everywhere. But there are some, instead of having to go to the store and buy every little product,
Right.
there are some things that you
can
do
use vinegar, and baking soda will clean lots of things.
Yeah. And then the final thing you can do to be more self-sufficient is kind of build up at least, maybe a 90-day food supply, and, with a garden. But even if you're, you may be in an apartment or something and not able to do a garden, you can go to your farmers markets and get really good food there usually, and you can start kind of building up a supply.
Right.
If you could have a freezer, that's great. But if you can't, then, maybe you can store something that's canned,
right,
that
and
you can have for a while.
And the other thing is, there's so many people now that have chickens.
Yeah.
And they sell their eggs, and that would be great for you to do, is to go find a farm or local somebody that has their own eggs, because I just think that the way that they treat the chickens,
Right.
and the way they're raised on the farms is not good for them. So if you're buying your eggs from a farm, most of the time they're free range,
Yeah.
so they're eating good stuff, and their eggs are better for you because of
Right.
the stuff that they're eating. There's no medication that's put in their food, and you could do that. Learn to trade with somebody or pay them a little something. Usually, if you see somebody that's got chickens, you can stop and say, hey, you sell your eggs, and, get your eggs that way because they're so much better for you.
Exactly. But, there was, there's also the risk if you're 100% self-sufficient, there's a good chance that you might get burned out.
You think so?
Like especially if you want a whole family, because a whole family, even with the modern day conveniences, is a lot of work.
This is true. It is true. Even if you do have all the modern things, if you have a big family and you're trying to be self-sufficient and, live out wherever in rural America, it's going to be kind of hard.
Yeah.
So, it is hard. You can get burnt out on that. And, the YouTube and all kind of makes the homesteading life look romanticized, I guess, and it makes it look all this easy to do, but it's not easy to do.
No.
And you do get burnt out on it.
Right.
And it's hard. It's not something that, and then you, as far as like, you have to have a little bit of money. I mean, for some things, like we said, it's if you was to try today to be self-sufficient, you have to work that. You got to get there, first, and you have to have a little bit of money to do most things that you need to do on a homestead.
Right.
Of course, you have to start it out, and you have to have money to do that.
And you also have to move at a pace,
You can't get everything at one time. You can't.
Like Dick Proenneke, he did take his time.
Yeah.
Took 30 years to do what he did, and he didn't
and
just
he
go up there
himself.
one summer. Yeah, he was by himself, but he took a lot of time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're planning on starting a homestead and being self-sufficient, you're probably not going to be 100% self-sufficient. I don't know that I'd even suggest shooting for that goal, but, whatever goal you shoot for, you don't want to overdo it. You want to take it at a speed where you don't get burned out. Because, even us, we have these raised beds. These are great. These are easy to maintain. But we also have a pretty big garden that's out back, out in the front. And it's the old-fashioned garden with the rows in it and everything that we do till. And honestly, it's a lot of work. I love it, but it can get overwhelming during the middle of the summer, especially here in Mississippi.
It's hot here.
Yeah, we're in central Mississippi, and it's very hot. And, right now it's perfect. It's pleasant.
It's perfect weather right now. I wish that we did... Like, we could have our garden right now, and it was producing, and we could go in there right now and, pick all the stuff. But when it does get ready, it's usually, on toward June, and it's really, really hot.
Yeah, it gets in the upper 90s, and it's a very humid area. It's, we like this area, but, there's a lot of advantage to it, a lot of advantage to being here, but it's some really hard work, especially when we're getting on up there and in age, and it is a lot of work for us. Now we do have full-time jobs, both of us, and we were able to get a tractor and stuff like that. If we didn't have those full-time jobs, there's no way. There is no way that we could live. Right, we couldn't live self-sufficient without some sort of income.
Right, we couldn't. So it's not. You just can't do it. It's not possible.
Or we hadn't figured out a way.
No, we haven't.
I think you're going to have some in this modern society. You got to have some kind of income.
Now, we were blessed because we had the land. We didn't have to buy land because it was family land. We didn't. A lot of people don't have that. They got to go buy land. And we didn't have to buy our land, it was inherited, and, we have to pay the taxes on it, obviously. So you have to have money to do that, So, we just don't have, we're just not completely self-sufficient. And
Yeah.
how long have we been back here?
Yeah,
6
we weren't
years?
born rich with a lot of money.
No,
so-
we've been back here 6 years.
I think 6 years. Yeah, and our story is kind of on YouTube channel, but briefly, what we did was we had a house, what people would call a suburban house, and with we still have I'd say semi-corporate jobs. Yours is more corporate than mine, but still, it's the 9-to-5 job, and we were kind of more into that. And we had the nice house, and then we realized one day we thought, we
We
gave
got
all
this
that
land.
up and got a really small house up here.
And because we had the
And
land.
I'd say
And
we're happier.
Yeah,
now.
I'd say we're happier too. And, I know we said last year we didn't really have a garden, but the years that we've had a garden and be able to, eat and grow our own
Yeah.
food, it just makes you feel healthier,
Yeah.
to be able to have that food that you can eat on your land. So we are not fully self-sufficient. I mean, and we
I would
want
say,
to be.
to be fully transparent, we're not. We're on the good years. We're during a lot of months we're somewhat self-sufficient on the food. But does she still make trips to the grocery
Yes,
store? Yeah,
yes, I
maybe
do.
not as many, but
Yeah.
but we do, and we are trying to change that and build that reserve up so you don't have
Right.
to go but we do. When we use the tractor, it uses diesel fuel.
Yeah,
And,
so-
so it's for us, there's no way we'll ever be total self-sufficient, but I do want to be more self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And-
Now, and I don't want to completely be, self-sufficient, but I do want to, like you
Yeah.
said, I do want to be more self-sufficient. I don't want to buy the vegetables from the
Yeah.
grocery store in a can. I want to be able to put my vegetables up in the freezer or can them and not have to buy any kind of vegetable from the store.
Because we talk about on our live streams, our grandparents and what they did. They didn't go to the grocery store a lot. Maybe
No.
towards the end they did, but during their younger years, they grew up out here in the country. We were out in the middle of nowhere, and they didn't go to the grocery store a lot. They
No,
probably
they didn't.
they went got the basics, and that's about it. That's kind of what we're looking for. But I don't think we want to give up everything, because we want to, every once in a while, we do want to go to a restaurant and eat a steak.
Yeah, we do.
We're being totally honest.
Yeah.
We're not going to be fake, but so if you're trying to start a homestead, think about these things, and you may not want to set the goal of being 100% self-sufficient. You may want to think of at what level you want to be, because
Right.
I don't think many people are going to be self-sufficient, but are 100%. But I think the goal is to be less for us is to be less dependent on the food supply chain,
That's right.
and less dependent on others, like for electricity and stuff. So
That's true.
we invite you to check out our YouTube channel, Mississippi Family Homestead, and we're going to do these podcasts weekly. So hopefully we'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.